Civil rights violations. Welcome to Senate Education. Ms. Simmons, thank you for joining us. We are talking about civil rights violations in public schools. We have had a lot of conversations back and forth here, independent schools, public schools. And one of the things that we've been reading in the news recently are different investigation and settlement agreements with public school districts and the U.S. Office of Civil Rights for things like race and sex-based discrimination and violation of special education laws. And we're trying to basically hold everybody, the independents and the publics, accountable in part through some of this work in 483. So I'm just wondering if you could just walk us through the process of what happens when the federal government gets involved in these kinds of investigations in cases. Also talk a little bit, are these usually complaint driven? What's the role of the Agency of Education when the feds get involved? And then I guess we can go on. I mean, does the AOE, for example, investigate these kinds of complaints in public schools? What can the AOE or the state do in these public school cases? Can a public school be shut down? All these kinds of things we would like to know a little bit more about so that we can make informed decisions in around 483. So with that, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Emily Simmons, General Counsel, Agency of Education. I so appreciate the introductory questions, and I hope those come from a written list so that we can go through them, because I didn't write them down in time. And have some ideas about maybe other sources of information you can get more detail than just from me.
Okay.
Let me try to organize my thoughts in a way that won't confuse us too much, because my umbrella statement that I knew I needed to share with you is that there's not one universal legal scheme that I can walk you through, right? So this is going to be a case where we have interactions and overlaps between federal systems, state systems, and school board systems. So it's going to be complex, and there's not going to be a universal answer for most of these questions. But with that being said, I think I'll start with orienting you from the agency's perspective to those cases. You gave a few examples of the Office of Civil Rights investigations. Would that be a fair enough place to start?
I'm writing down questions. Yep.
So I will tell you, I am not expert in the investigation and resolution process run by the Office of Civil Rights. It is a totally distinct process from any agency of education state authority. But in a very general sense, what you're going to find there is the United States Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights enforcing certain federal protections that are either in the United States Constitution or in United States acts of Congress, really, those federal laws and regulations. I did go to information that office, that OCR, makes available, and they have a nice summary of the laws that they enforce through their investigation procedures. The ones that you're going to recognize are those claims of discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. That's under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. Some other education amendments in Title IV, which are also related to discrimination, but on the basis of sex. That's Title IX. We talked about that the other day. And then Section 504, which this committee talks about a good bit, students with disabilities or individuals with disabilities. So if you're wondering about an OCR investigation, know that it's federal, that the Agency of Education doesn't have a role. It's done directly between the Office of Civil Rights and the location of the complaint, so say a school district in the case that you cited. And there's not formal notice to the Agency of Education. We will often find out through other avenues, but there's not a formal place that the agency would become involved or have knowledge. which might be a surprise. Those are complaint driven. And things I think about with a complaint driven process is that it's whether you see an investigation is totally dependent on, first, an individual deciding that they have a complaint to make, experiencing some kind of outcome that motivates them to make a complaint. Second, that the facts of what happened to them line up with the jurisdiction of the Office of Civil Rights. And third, that the Office of Civil Rights agrees, they accept it for investigation. Those cases, when they become investigations, aren't going to be an exact match for state law violations that the Agency of Education would have jurisdiction over.
Okay.
The Agency of Education has and now I'm kind of switching away from OCR, so maybe I should pause and see if there were questions there.
Seeing none.
Okay, good, because I probably wouldn't be able to answer them. That's not me. I just know about it because I'm an education lawyer. So the Agency of Education does receive complaints of all kinds, and there's a category of complaints that we refer to a person's private attorney because they need to be advised of their legal rights, right? The lawyers at the agency can't be that person's attorney. We provide the information for the Office of Civil Rights so that the person is knowledgeable about how to make a complaint there. And we don't opine over whether they should make a complaint or you have a good complaint. We just are very neutral and provide the information so they can make that individual judgment. And we also provide the information about Vermont's Human Rights Commission complaint process, because that's our state body that deals with claims of discrimination. So that's when we are not able to intake a complaint for agency action because the complaint's not coming from decisions of the agency, rules put forward by the agency or the state board, or authorities given to the agency. And 9.5 times out of 10, that's going to be because the facts under the complaint are given specifically to school districts or supervisory unions.
Are not given.
Are given.
Are given.
Most of the, and this is because we're, again, talking about a complaint-driven process, right? This is not monitoring that the agency undertakes that I'm talking about right now. It's complaints coming into the agency from students, families, educators, members of the community who have observed something. Most of the time, the agency is listening to that person, taking down that person's information, holding an ear out for something that we can directly enforce, and if not, referring either to the superintendent's office, the chain of command in the district, and or Office of Civil Rights and Human Rights Commission.
So I'm going to give you an example, which I'm hoping you can take us through so we better understand. And I also want to pull, because this is related to 483, a little bit between the public and the independent. So Springfield, as I recall, the state increased the monitoring of special education in that district. So start from the beginning, it's complaint driven, and then take us through the process that you just outlined.
Right. So I'm going to change your hypothetical a little bit because we're talking about the increased monitoring. That's not a complaint-driven process. But let's say we had a complaint about special education in a particular school district. Would that work?
That's fine. Yeah.
So for special education, I'm glad we picked this one because we're talking about a place where the Agency of Education does by law have more authority than other topics within schools because of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. We have a stronger state touch on the activities of schools than for other topics. So if it's a parent or a student making a complaint about failures that they perceive in the special education program, we will direct them to what we call our dispute resolution process, which we're mandated to have by federal law, and run it as a state agency. And they might, depending on the wishes of the complainant and the facts, they might end up in one of three channels for the agency formally investigating and adjudicating the substance of the complaint, which are all dictated by federal law. The outcomes could be corrective action that the agency requires of the school district. The outcome could be a finding of no violation of rule or statute, or really anything in between. There also, it's important to note, one of those three tracks is mediation that is paid for by the state for the school district and the parent or student to resolve the problem without a formal adjudication. And that is the most common disposition of those type of complaints.
So in those situations, AOE related to special education has a lot of authority in terms of rectifying and working on the situation. What if a school, though, just cannot find a special educator around these, given the workforce shortage, given everything that's going on, and a child is in the public school, they don't have a public school educator, which we can all say right now, it may be possible given the shortage. How do we accommodate those situations? Does the state have some flexibility in some ways to make sure that the student is getting something?
It's going to be really fact dependent.
Okay.
But what I can tell you is the obligation of the district to provide that student with FAPE doesn't go anywhere. It remains, right? And so
I'm sorry, with FAPE?
Free and appropriate public education. So that's our shorthand. I'm sorry. Thank you for making me explain our jargon. That's really the catch-all term for the district's legal obligations to a student with disabilities to provide them the services that their special education team has determined they need to have the benefit of their public education. So it's really everything. So to restate that, if the district is experiencing hardships around finding the individual who's qualified to deliver those services, the district has to keep trying and retains that obligation. They're not relieved of that obligation because of the hardship. And so it's a matter of timing. It's a really, really hard situation many times when you see that the student is going without the service for a period of time. And so it's the agency's role to identify corrective actions that the district should be taking and hold the district accountable to those corrective actions.
Given the circumstances out there, though, right now, in terms of the shortage, if a student were not getting those services with the federal government, is the federal government okay with saying, hey, we are still working on it, we are still doing a search, we're doing our best? Or does the federal government get involved somehow, just saying, hey, there's no excuse here?
Right. So
circumstances, yeah.
Right. So at the individual level, there's room for continuing to try. There's room for continued effort, but not unlimited room. Eventually, the finding by the Office of Special Education Programs, that's the federal government in this case, we call them OSEP, comes against the district and the agency for a pattern, for instance, of that kind of failure without following the process to require meaningful corrective action and follow up, right? So it's not, as far as OSEP, that federal office is concerned, it's not okay for the agency to say, well, come on, district, we really mean it this time, indefinitely, right? So they expect to see escalating expectations of the district, creative suggestions for resolving the problem, And that's in terms of their monitoring of the state and the district. Remember that the student has a civil option to file a lawsuit if they believe that their rights have been violated and have a court rule on whether they should get compensatory relief. I mean, you can have cases against districts that are outside this agency dispute resolution process that are private legal actions.
So Ms. Simmons, so now I just want to move to the independence here a little bit. So with Act 173 and the 2200 rule, if an independent school were not to offer special education services that are outlined in Act 173, how does the state board intervene then? And is it different for the independents than the publics, or publics versus independents?
It is different. Let's keep track of the layers of what's going to happen.
Yep.
I'm going to talk about what the state board and the agency would do in response to the school as an entity. I'm going to talk about the relationship between the student's school district of residence, right? Because they're a legal resident of a public school district, no matter where they go to school. And what might happen between the agency and the school district, or perhaps the federal government, the agency and the school district.
Great.
So it is pretty complex. So let's start at the student level. The student not receiving the services should, and I'm going to say their parent, should be complaining to, making it known that they're dissatisfied they're not receiving the service at the independent school,
Okay.
with the independent school and the student's IEP team,
Okay.
which includes representatives from the supervisory union where the student lives. So those are public school district employees that actually constitute the IEP team. They're the group that makes the decisions about the student services and have the legal responsibility to see those services delivered. Just in the case of a student at an independent school, think of it as contracting with the independent school for their staff to deliver the service. So when there's a breakdown, the LEA has a strong role to go to the independent school and try to correct the behavior there, to correct the deficiencies there with the service. Okay. That could escalate up through the contractual relationship between the LEA and the independent school. It also can be the parent's complaint directly to the state, because maybe that's a violation of IDEA, federal law. So we're back to those three channels that I talked about earlier, where mediation is the most common one. But the parent and the student have the same legal rights to special education from the LEA when the student attends the independent school, as they would if the student attended public school. That legal obligation to provide special education is what I call really sticky on the supervisory union. Sometimes we say the LEA. Also, separate track really, but about the same facts, the agency would investigate the failure to provide the service as potentially a violation of the independent school rules, right? Independent schools are required to provide assurances to the agency that they understand special education, will employ appropriate staff to carry out special education, monitor the student's IEP, implement the student's IEP, and communicate with the LEA about any changes. So perhaps something comes of what we were seeing with that student at the level of, okay, we have an independent school that we believe has violated a rule of the state board about remaining an independent school that receives public tuition, right? An approved independent school. And I'm making myself out of breath because this is a lot. Then the agency would conduct an investigation and perhaps make a recommendation to the state board, including that the school's approval be revoked. That school, if the state board agreed after a hearing, could no longer accept public tuition.
helpful. Great. Just looking at my special education side by side with 43. Anything else you want to add related to this topic? It sounds like there are processes for both, but it sounds like for the publics, the feds get more involved perhaps than the independents. The feds get more involved with the publics than with the independents.
The federal law applies to public school districts.
Okay.
It requires them to provide those services to the students that live inside their boundaries.
Okay.
And in Vermont, which is somewhat unique in the country, where we have many of our students attending non-public schools with the financial support or in lieu of their school district operating a public school for them, the federal law does not care, right? It is very clear that that obligation remains. The method of fulfilling it is to work through the services provided at an independent school. And it's really hard. I mean, I think any professional working in the field will tell you, we anticipate that there will be a lot of work to understand what does that relationship ideally look like between the public school officials who are fulfilling this federal obligation and the folks at the independent school who want to see those services provided to students. But in a very dry legal sense, the federal obligation is not on them. They are cooperating in carrying it out, but it is not sticky to them in the way it is to the public school officials.
Okay, that's very helpful. Great. Committee, any questions, comments? It's helpful to me as we sort of craft 483 a little bit more. So we really appreciate it, Ms. Simmons. We may have you back in if we have any additional questions, but that was a very helpful overview.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I wasn't in a position to put it all in writing for you. It doesn't all exist in one place. And so please do call me back if we can go over some more. We usually do this on Fridays with me and this committee Friday afternoon. So you just
Thank you.
All right, you're back.
We have Ms. Dorda Duke, that's not you, of course, and her family coming from Woodland County. Oh, there's a minute. Okay. They asked to testify also on 483. It's waiting. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Doing well. How's everybody?
Good. Welcome to Senate Education. Jennifer, I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. Dorda Duke?
Dorda Duque.
Dorda Duque. Thank you very, very much.
Problem.
So thank you for reaching out to the committee. This is Senate Education. And you mentioned that you would like to just address the committee and talk a little bit about your personal circumstances relating to your, I believe, son.
Yes. So do you want me to just give you a little story?
Yeah, whatever works for you. Whatever you would like to convey to the committee would be helpful.
Just as a little background. So we adopted our child out of the Vermont foster care system when he was 6. And he had no real true formal education, mostly because he had 10 homes. So there was a lot of trauma, as you can imagine, involved. When we enrolled him in Jamaica Village School as a kindergartner, we initiated an IEP as part of the process because there was a lot of trauma and we wanted to make sure that any kind of social and emotional issues were stated, the teachers understood ahead of time, that he had PTSD, that there was a lot of connection issues, and we had therapists involved. So it was thoughtfully put together. The director of special ed in the district was phenomenal, worked with us, and we enrolled him in Jamaica Village School. What happened at Jamaica Village School was a lack of understanding of the IEP, which we pretty much met weekly to reinforce. We brought our therapists in. Elias was afraid, since it was his first formal education. He had had so much loss and so many homes. He would get nervous in the afternoon when he would anticipate time for us to pick him up. So anywhere between like 2:15 and 2:45, he'd get antsy and he would walk towards the window and try to look for us.
So Mr. Duque, just so I have a little bit more, and I'm sorry if you've already said this, so just tell us a little more background on your son himself. How old was he then when you adopted him?
He was 6.
He was 6, okay.
Yeah.
Said he was in and out of different homes for a number of years.
We were his 11th home, yes.
Okay, okay. So he arrives in Jamaica, he's at the Jamaica Village School and having difficulty.
Well, so he would go to the window each day looking for us. And kindergarten, he was in kindergarten from January to June. And that particular kindergarten teacher really kind of understood what was going on. She knew he was just anxious about us picking him up. Fast forward to 1st grade, he would start to do the same thing. And the particular classroom he was in, it was, sit down, get back in your seat, sit down, get back in your seat. He would try to run out of the school to come home, which we are less than a quarter mile from the school. They proceeded to restrain him. They restrained him 32 times. It was horrific. It was something that caused repeated trauma, and he had a huge fear of school. We removed him from school after probably 100 meetings and attempts to fix what was going on. And we chose to homeschool him, mostly because he wouldn't go back into a school building. He wouldn't even go back into a school building for Cub Scout meetings. We had to move our Cub Scout meetings to a different location because our son was so afraid of going inside a school building. So we homeschooled him through 4th grade, where we interviewed several schools, all of which knew that we wanted to continue with the IEP because of the situation. We also didn't know how he would adapt to a school, but we really wanted to get him back into a school environment for his own sake. And we met with the Mountain School in Winhall. Again, like I said, they knew we had an IEP, never a question about whether or not that was a problem. We chatted with them. We all agreed that it was a really nice community, a nice fit. It was only 15 minutes from our house. And we moved forward with that, and they welcomed us with open arms. He's graduating 8th grade this year from Mountain School. It's been an amazing experience. My husband and I still have a little trauma from what happened at Jamaica, but we've never had a phone call home. There's never been an issue. There was never a problem. The entire staff took the IEP, read the IEP, understood any accommodations we had, and honored it. And we are so thankful that we had that option. And we were very thankful that they were there, only 15 minutes from us. As we all know, in Vermont, there's not a lot of choices. And that was a good choice for us and worked out exceptionally well for our family. We're now finishing up the search for high school. We've met with BBA and we've met with St. Michael's in Brattleboro. Again, both understood that, we're moving to a 504 because he doesn't really need an IEP, but never a question about whether or not he's a good student for them or if that's a good environment for him.
So I've never been to the Mountain School. Tell us something about it. It's a independent special education school. It's an independent therapeutic school.
No, it's general ed.
Okay.
Yeah, it was originally the Winhall Elementary School when it became the Winhall Mountain School when the town decided to go full school choice. It's K through 8, all general ed. Yeah, Elias is general ed. He's a straight A student. There's no need there. But it was a big question when he was going back into the school if it was going to be able to be managed. He wrote an essay for BBA for a scholarship, and the essay he wrote, they asked him what he's accomplished over the past 4 or 5 years that he feels so most proud of. And he wrote about the ability to go back to school and how Mountain School helped him do that. And so we're very grateful that they were an option there for us.
Did you look at any others? Did you look at any special education schools?
We did. Yes,
Okay. Because there are some in Wyndham County. And
there are.
so what, can you just tell us why they weren't a fit, if you don't mind? And where a general education school was?
The issues that were happening, they weren't behavioral issues. They were a reaction to something. And that was not understood at the elementary school. It was not the staff. What had happened, honestly, the staff was trained how to restrain and they used it. And because of that, my son became very afraid of them. It was the wrong approach. We had our psychiatrist in there, psychologist in there to discuss, you never put hands on this child. He's been through so much. He's going to be afraid of you. And they continued to do it. When we visited several of the special ed schools, it was about addressing issues that he didn't have. And we knew that he needed a general ed environment. That's what he needed. He needed to just be able to go to school and feel safe. And a lot of those schools have things in place that would have reminded him of coming from Community House in Brattleboro, where he was locked in a room. A lot of schools have padded rooms and locked rooms and safe spaces, which are understandable, but that's not what he needed. He needed general ed. He needed to be treated like a kid.
How many kids are in the school?
89.
And what grades again?
He's graduating 8th grade this year.
So is it pre-K through 8? Is that what it is?
It's K through 8.
Thank you for sharing that. Senator Cheek?
Hi, Jennifer. Nice to meet you. I'm one of your senators for Wyndham County, and thank you for sharing your story. Just out of clarification, I know there's a lot of independent schools in Wyndham County. The Wynn Hall School, is this the ski school or is that
No.
different?
No,
Okay.
it's the one right on Route 30 in Wynn Hall.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else? Thanks for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story. I don't think we have any other questions.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
Hey, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Ms. Emerson.
Hi.
Sorry, I didn't recognize you at first.
Can I
Yes, right.
just say
Yeah.
something before? I apologize, guys. I can't stay quiet anymore. With all due respect to my chair and to this committee. I never thought I would be on an education committee where I feel like I need to be advocating for public education. Because with testimony like that on a fairly regular basis, I feel as though it is being debased and demeaned regularly. That was a very compelling story. I feel very sorry for the young man and for the family. But that young man had the privilege of having parents that were able to advocate for him and move him to a different school. And there are students who don't have that privilege. The answer is to fix the school, the public school. I just want to say I am shocked by the testimony that we have been getting in here. And for every story like that that we hear, I would like to hear a success story coming out of the public school. Something wonderful that happened, a family that was well served. This doesn't feel balanced to me. And
But it's not a bill about public school.
every day, though, I am shocked. It is about public schools. It's about the whole system. It's about the whole ecosystem, and it doesn't feel balanced to me.
You know how I feel about our zoning committee now. It's like, how do you get people, we need to hear both sides of the story.
Right.
And the only people that testify are the ones that want to step up and say something. So.
But the onus is on us
I know.
to get people to come in and testify. And I just have to say, I'm shocked. That's all. We can leave it at that, but
No, I don't know if we can. I mean, frankly, I think this is a bill about independent schools. We're trying to understand the independent schools. We're trying to understand what the situation out there is personally that we're trying to solve through this bill. I mean, some admissions, tours we're talking about. I agree. I would frankly be much more interested right now in working on young girls and social emotional health. I'd be much more interested in working on making sure our school teachers get stuff. But this is the bill before us. This bill is before us. We have to take testimony. We have to understand it. Do I think it's a solution to things? No, I really don't. It doesn't really deal with the anti-discrimination stuff. That's been done. It doesn't deal with the special education stuff. That's been done. And now we've got, school moratorium that's been put in the bill in terms of independent school. So I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm happy to shift and focus on public schools. I would love to spend our time focusing on public schools. This is the bill before us, right? I mean, I would love it to do nothing else but to say, here's where we're at. Let's focus on improving our public education. Please.
may I thank you. There will always be compelling stories. Senator Williams gave us an incredibly compelling story in health and welfare where he told us that he quit smoking cigarettes after 40 years. But we still passed the ban on flavored cigarettes because as a system, as a public health system, in spite of his compelling story, we felt like we had to do something. We're looking at a system and a systemic approach to something, and individual stories, as compelling as they may be, are individual stories. And I will leave it at that. I'm looking forward to.
No, and I'm compelled to respond. Those individual stories are the lives. We can talk public independent. This committee is about educating kids. And frankly, I think you and I may disagree in terms of, I think the landscape of education out there works for a range of kids. There are kids in my district that absolutely love and fit those large public schools. Love them. Can do all sorts of things. And then we have the student, the transgender student, who had to transfer, had to move to a different town because they were being bullied. And I agree. That's just one student. But then we heard from another student. Seems to me that some flexibility in educational opportunities works. We don't want kids to commit suicide. We want kids to be healthy. We want to make schools a match for kids. And I think shutting them down or doing whatever different people want to do, I just don't think it makes sense. Nor do I think it makes sense at this moment when kids are still recovering from COVID. But I welcome anybody else to join this conversation because this is what the bill is about. I mean, again, I would be happy to table it, happy to just focus on public education. I'd love to take testimony in terms of increasing the teacher's salary. I'd love you to put that bill in, Senator. We were in the classroom. Put in a bill that says nobody else should be paid less than $60,000. I mean, that's where personally I think we need to be working.
I would like to make sure that we continue with the moratorium. I don't think that we need more
Right.
independent schools. I do think that could be problematic. So that's my take. I think that's one of the most important pieces right now. It's my 2 cents. I can't wait to hear about.
Which is in the budget, which is great. And hopefully that will slow things down. Ms. Emerson, we have you here to talk a little bit about CTEs, but we do have a bill before us around, we're trying to understand a little bit about the process that students go through with regard to CTEs, how they get into CTE programs. And again, this goes right back to the bill that we're talking about, 483. Tell us about how kids apply to be CTE recipients. Tell us the process, help us understand all sorts of things around that. That'd be great.
I haven't read the bill that you're
Yeah,
talking
no,
about.
it's just
so
general sort of, how
I'm
admissions
responding
works.
to admissions.
yes.
So hello, everyone. I'm Jody Emerson, Superintendent Director at the Central Vermont Career Center. I shared with you the written testimony and I brought some, but it looks like you already have it, so that's great. On that, I talk about the programs that I have, and those programs are limited in size due to safety features, the space in the classroom, et cetera. So A heavy trades program, for example, can have 16 students with 1 teacher. That's the rules and regulations. If we add an aide to that class, they can go up to 21 if we feel like we can do so safely. In some of my programs, the space in the classroom makes it so that I can only have 10 or 12 students. For instance, my medical professions program currently has 10 students, so we don't have space for the classroom and lab to have more students at this time. Next year, we're moving into a different classroom to add 2 more students. So there are some constraints on students that we can accept, the number of students we accept. I was here previously and talked about the fact that we usually have to turn away 100 students each year, at least recently. And so,
And you're available 11 to 12 or 10, 11 to 12.
good question. We do have an exploratory program that allows students who are not going into 9th or 10th grade, so they're 9th or 10th graders, to explore all of our programming that is for juniors and seniors in general. We have to get permission for a student to go into any of those other programs if they're not 16 per the state regs. So they can go through exploratory and
Yeah.
then are eligible to go into those programs if they do well in that exploratory year. So I did give you the full admissions process that we created last year in that packet, but basically students are expected to tour our facility at some point before they apply. The application is online and basically they fill in their directory information, why they want to attend, and then their counselor has a role to provide a recommendation or not in some cases, and information about their grades, their attendance, and their behavior data. And the reason that we look for that is because we, for instance, in automotive, we tend to have 60+ applicants for the automotive program. And we want to know that a student coming into the program is likely to succeed. And so they need to have safety. The behavior data is really important in that case.
Okay.
For students going into EMS or medical professions, there's some pretty heavy college courses that go into that. And we are judged on the success of our students in those programs and attaining those credits as part of our CLNA process and our Perkins funding every year. So we're really held accountable to those measures. And so we need to make sure that a student looks like they have the prerequisites to be successful in that program if they're coming into it, or that we can get them to that level to be successful. So a lot of folks think that when they're going into career in tech ed, it's really all hands-on, all the time, lots of fun. It's doing what I really want to do. There are lots of components. Every program either has industry recognized credentials or college credits or both with it.
Senator Gilbert.
Quick question about Perkins. I know there's funding that comes from Perkins. Do you ever feel as though, because I've been told this, if you don't say it, limits your ability to innovate or be creative in any way? And do you feel that the benefits of it outweigh any negatives?
Before Chances, can you explain Perkins or something?
Perkins is a federal grant. The state is, we had a small state allowance, and then it's distributed by a formula that I believe the agency has set up to the centers across the state.
Do they have certain criteria on curriculum and such?
So mostly there's accountability measures, and so there are 6 areas that we have to develop a 4-year plan to in our application process. So that includes meeting certain criteria around literacy, math, and science skills of students, which we can't take full credit for because we usually have the students.
For entry or for exit? For graduate?
For exit. We have graduation requirements that we need to meet. There's some equity components of it, so non-traditional students in programming, for example, whether
Driven by,
that's,
like, quota, percentage?
it's a percentage piece, and so our goal is to improve that over time. I can share our most recent accountability data with you after this meeting.
Okay,
that
thank you.
makes sense.
Sorry to derail.
It's okay. You asked about Perkins. So I think it's a little bit of both. It's not a lot of money. For my just over $4 billion, not billion, $1 million budget, I wish it was billion, because then I'd be building a new building. $4 million budget, about $250,000 of it is from Perkins. I think the good thing about Perkins, even though it's kind of a pain, is that we are held accountable and we are looking at data every 2 years. We are required to. And we have to set forth how we're gonna improve in some of those measures every year to get that funding. And the money has to go for those things. I think that it can make it difficult to innovate because there are very specific definitions and criteria, but it also can give you the opportunity to innovate because you have this funding that's not from your local budget that might allow you to do something new if it meets that criteria. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it can go either way. It feels like a lot of work for a little bit of money. And I think the accountability is really important.
Thanks, that's helpful, because we dig into CTE. I think that'll be a question we
Yeah.
should continue to ask, yeah.
I just came from a Perkins 5 conference though, so
You're fluent.
I don't know if I would have said the same thing last week.
Okay, thank
I
you.
probably would have. Anyway, so our students, they visit, they apply online, their counselor submits some data. My assistant director, my school counseling coordinator, and instructors use a rubric to try to score students on that information that comes in. We don't take anyone out of the mix at that point. Everyone gets the opportunity to come in and shadow the 2 choices of programs that they applied for if they applied for 2. Sometimes they only apply for 1. So they come in for a full day for us, which is a 4-hour day, and they shadow the 2 programs that they're interested in. It gives them an opportunity to be in there for an hour or so and check out what's going on, see what other kids are doing. And then the teacher also gets an opportunity to see them, see how they interact with the students in the program already. And this year we added the program preview day, where instructors invited folks back. So they took that score from the initial application, they took what they saw on that preview day, and they invited students back to try out for the program for a day. And it gave them the opportunity to really talk about what are the expectations of this program, what are some of the things we do, to show students both the components of what it looks like to be in the classroom working on the curriculum that they need to. If it's building trades, for example, they're doing the National Construction Corps curriculum. And then what it looks like to be in the classroom and doing some activities or taking a look at the tools they might work with. They couldn't do any of the actual projects because they haven't done the OSHA 10 safety yet. So from that, and in that time, our instructors also interviewed students. So we made sure we had other staff available to support them, being able to one-on-one interview students. And then they made decisions there. And then we did a whole second round, pretty much repeat the process. And our third round starts, the applications open on Monday.
So what happens to kids who don't get in?
So
How many kids did you turn away?
we have had over 300 applicants. We've accepted probably close to 200 at this point. We have 3 programs that still have openings. We have some wait lists. So we'll tell them you didn't get in, but you're on the wait list. They will get notification of they've either been accepted or they're waitlisted or they didn't get accepted. If they didn't get accepted, they can appeal. They write an appeal to me. I do some research because I'm not part of the application process, so I don't do any of the steps along the way. And I find out why were they declined, and then I invite them and the instructor of that program to come meet with me and talk through like what went into that decision, why do you think that you should be here despite those concerns, and we talk through it and decide if they might get that chance. And sometimes I grant their appeal request, and sometimes I don't.
Usually the reasons you're turning them down.
Most frequently is concerns about their ability to be successful, especially around safety, or the interactions they had in the classroom. Like we had one student this year who showed up for program preview day and basically explained that it was effing stupid and she had no interest in being there. So if that's what you're going to say out loud
Sure,
to the class
sure,
and the teacher,
sure.
then you're not going to get a spot in that program.
You must have some kids that this is really what they want to do. This is
Absolutely.
their thing, and then
Absolutely.
there's no spot for them.
Mhm.
And then they just go back to the regular,
We hope they have the opportunity to apply again,
Uh-huh.
that it's early enough that they'll have another chance. In some cases, I've told the students, this is what you need to do to be successful. I think we have some schools that are better than others at coaching students and like along the way and saying, hey, if that's something you're gonna wanna do later, then here's what you need to clean up to get in. And I think the 8th grade tours that we do in May are really helping that. And this year, when we get all of our Sunday schools in as part of that, I think that'll be a good support for students seeing what they might be interested in and then working towards it. having that goal.
And other CTE programs is the same, you know? Rapper,
So
Zephyr.
I know that River Valley is a first come, first serve. When the application comes in for a program, they just take them until they're full.
Just a quick question. I apologize if we already covered this, but the tours of the CTEs, are those mandatory? They have to go in and check things out?
We've asked that they bring all of their 8th graders as a field trip. It's a pretty quick, they tour through all the programs. We give them some CPCC swag and send them out the door. So we do ask that they all come in for that. For the fall tours that we do, it's 9th, 10th grade opt-in sort of thing. So students who think they want to apply, come on over, and their school gives them the opportunity to do that.
So as a superintendent, what if you were told that you could not conduct on campus visits, or you could not look at academic records for these prospective students? How would you react?
I think not looking at the academic records, we could figure out a process through that program preview day to just get a quick assessment of, does this kid seem like they're eligible to be here?
How would you do that?
We could do a short little quiz like math and literacy
What if you
related.
couldn't test them? If you couldn't see them,
It's-
no application?
Then we'd have to accept it by lottery. I'm curious, honestly, in the conversations we've had this week, I was with 5 other CTE directors in Maryland for the Perkins 5 conference and some staff from the Agency of Education. And we recognize that the state doesn't collect the application data. So there might be opportunities where we could support kids who, if my program's full, to get into another program close by. We know that we have to work on transportation, so that's not a barrier. Having kids have to find their own transportation to somewhere else. If they don't get into mine and get in somewhere else, that's a huge barrier. I wonder if we compare data as far as students who are removed from programs, because we don't necessarily have to keep them for the full school year. We're not an LEA. We don't, if it's not safe for them to be there, they can be removed. I wonder if in that scenario where students are just accepted first come, first serve, if there are more students that leave or not, or if the sending schools do a really good job of kind of curating that information and setting kids up for success. It's a lot of information we don't have.
Thank you.
You, CTEs in the state of Vermont are sort of under slightly different governance structure, right, than public schools and. for
So we're
example-
not an LEA.
Right,
There are 4 different governance models in our in CTE in Vermont, and you have been given a presentation from APA about maybe ways to resolve that.
I'm not sure, maybe, but I'm not sure committee members know that there are some teachers or instructors in tech centers that haven't gone through sort of like the education path. They've come from industry. So maybe.
We've talked about that previously here a little bit.
Okay.
But yes, we have, some of my instructors are science or social studies or English teachers, but many of them are industry professionals who come in, and when they start working for me, they also start taking the teacher apprenticeship courses, which are through Castleton and VTC right now, and they have to, for their first 3 or 4 years, not only be teaching as a brand new teacher, but also taking those courses at the same time.
And my one last question, with wearing my school construction hat, do you feel that you could expand and increase capacity? Like,
Yes,
yeah, okay,
I can expand in my current location.
okay.
I would love to build a standalone career and technical center that was a CTE high school, but we don't do that in Vermont yet.
Yet,
Stand by.
Center weeks.
Oh, just curious, so you mentioned a program where you took folks out of industry and you're assisting, or at least you're guiding them on how to attain teaching credentials. Is there any funding? Is there state funding that supports?
We use a little bit of Perkins for that. And basically every teacher has in their contract, in most cases, a certain amount of credits that they can have paid for. My center has historically paid all of those. It's part of why we want to get them in. They're taking a pay cut in most cases to come into teaching. So we've funded that fully.
It's very helpful. Any other questions from Ms. Emerson? And just on the other side, CTEs, we are expecting a report based on the report that we just got back.
Yeah.
The Agency of Education, we're having it next week. They are expected to give us an implementation plan around that report. That's due sometime, I believe,
By July, right?
by July. So what we're having them come in to talk to us about a little bit is if we can maybe give them some guiding questions so that we arrive back next January with something that we can actually work from rather than the report itself. So we're gonna start with them next week and then go from there.
Great, please invite CTE directors to the conversation as well.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So a couple of things got pushed until Tuesday, tomorrow. So that closes for the day. What's that?
No, no.
I said sorry.
Oh,
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's all your fault.
We do have to make a decision on H4 83. And I think, again, we need to have, I'm not wearing rose-colored glasses in this committee. I think we have issues in education across the state. And I recognize we need to do and would love to table 483 and just focus on our independent schools. Would love that. Nothing more. But this bill is before us. 3 things are in it that are key to me, that are already moving: the anti-discrimination piece, special education piece, and now the piece that we put in the budget for the moratorium. So I look to others, whether or not you want to move other sections of it. You don't have to tell us right now. We're going to have a walkthrough tomorrow of the bill and sort of what's in, what's out. But I would, there's nothing I would like more than to switch our attention in dealing with some of the things that Senator Bulick, I know she has some bills coming to deal with them, is talking about. And I also want to, for the record, make the public aware that this committee is deeply committed to public education. There is no one on this committee that has not ever talked in any way but showing me personally commitment toward public education. That being said, it's not my job to sit here with rose-colored glasses and think everything's okay, because I don't think everything's okay. I do believe there are some of these schools out there that are saving kids' lives because they're not a fit. At the same time, I think there are probably some public schools that are saving kids' lives because they are a fit for those kids. So there's a lot happening, but I would just, I want to respond by defending everybody on this committee's commitment that I've seen so far as it relates to improving public education. So, yes.
Can I suggest that you put together like 5 questions that you would ask all of us in regards to those questions? That way we can have a discussion. I got some ideas that I don't even want to talk about right now. I think that, we should all be striving for every school in Vermont to be a perfect school. And I think there may be different standards, I know there's different results. And I don't want to offend anybody. I think we are all in this together, and we're on this committee because we agree.
We're committed to kids.
We are.
We're absolutely committed to kids, and there are going to be kids like the young man that we just heard about that just happens to not do well in one school. And as we're making decisions about 483, we just need to keep that in mind. So in terms of questions, it'll probably be helpful when we go through the bill section by section tomorrow in terms of what people want in, what people want in. Anything else?
Well, actually, yes,
Yeah.
sorry. What's happening with 486? Because I do think if we're going to vote on 486, I would just recommend, or I would like to hear from more superintendents or school district employees who've dealt with the testing piece of it.
Sure, so 46, as you know, everything is in the budget except the piece having to do with, we increased the board membership, we put the 16 million Burlington, we put the 200,000 into the committee, we put the language that gets the additional dollars out. So the thing that's not there is the postponing of these things, and that's the conversation I think you want to have.
That's what I was about to say, too, is the, is the, pausing. You know, I've gotten lots of messages about, you know, pro pausing and then some anti pausing, right? And so it's, yeah, there's a lot to it, and I'm really trying to make sure that whatever happens with 46, I'm at least representing my county. Which
Yeah.
is, from what I've heard, is in support of the pausing. I don't want to accidentally misrepresent, but as far from what I've heard thus far, there's a lot of support for pausing. And I think there could be some conversation about whether we pause the testing or whether we pause remediation, or, you know, that's one conversation we could have.
So process-wise, what's the best way of approaching that? Do you take each issue, straw poll it, and then alter?
Yeah, well, on like 43, that's what we'll do is we'll, you know, take each issue and straw poll it. On 46, the only thing that's not in the budget is the issue of the pause. And with just the reality of the world in, no matter what this committee does, we can talk about it or not, but the pro tem will have a say in it. And that is not a voice yet that wants to pause. And I think the governor's office doesn't want to pause, which means a veto policy and all sorts of things. So I don't want an intellectual exercise also that doesn't get us anywhere. So.
No, you,
Thank you.
So there's some different language we can play with that might give more flexibility to districts, something like that. We can look at that. Yeah. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I would read where I'm sitting, I realize Senator Gulick is deeply invested in the opinion of, and I am too, of the school personnel. On the other side, we have the medical community. The second physician we just heard from today was Dr. Chen. And we have a Vermont Public Interest Group coming in tomorrow, also getting involved in this. And
What's the issue?
whether or not to pause.
Oh,
Yeah.
so pause.
Yeah. So it's, but there might be, oftentimes what I find in this building is when push comes to shove, there might be some kind of middle path. I don't really know what it
Really?
is.
so kind of what?
Middle path.
Well, okay.
Well, some of the testing.
I didn't notice.
Right, right.
I didn't notice that.
Well, when you have a committee that might, yeah. When you have a committee that might be split on it, there might be another path.
I mean, I thought Ms. Hornbuckle's testimony was very interesting, but she didn't actually point to any health outcomes.
Martine, we heard from Dr. Levine, the Chief
No,
Medical
I know, I'm
Officer.
talking about Ms. Hornbuckle.
Okay, we
yesterday.
just, did you read Dr. Chen's testimony? I mean,
I
these are the
just
doctors.
barely
I
got
would
it.
absolutely read what the doctors
I
say.
certainly will.
Absolutely. I don't want you headline saying there are no medical repercussions at all from
I was
PCBs.
just talking about Ms. Hornbuckle.
Well, of course not. She's an engineer.
Right.
Yeah. So let's stick with the medical professionals and leave it at that.